John,
Hey,
you could actually have played that live as an intro.
I know. Well,
So you're coming to us from Studio 650. Is that right, John?
that's exactly right. Whose possibilities keep expanding. We had this wonderful 48-hour music video recording session here with the eminent Taylor Eichste, pianist, and then Becca Stevens and Gretchen Parlato, who are well known on the singing circuit. And we had a full crew of videographers and sound engineers and craft services with lots of snacks and things like that. And 48 hours immersed with the College of Musical Knowledge was quite an experience. So we're now looking for other uses for the loft because it worked really, really well.
That's so cool. So for those who haven't been to Studio 650, and we'll start sending invitations at some point once the world gets through its variants, what's behind John is a full scope of windows. So how you got that green screen there is fantastic.
It's producing production magic, Brian. Let me just see if I can quickly show you. Let's see here. So, well, while you're, I'm just kind of fiddling around here trying to find our thing here. But you're there, right?
I am here. So while John is
go.
getting together, oh, he's got it.
Share screen. Share screen. Not really. How's that? See that?
Oh, look at that. Yeah. Wow.
That's what was going on here last weekend.
That's incredible. The fact that that's such an expansive loft. I can't even. What you are not seeing, everyone, is the fact that there are two more pianos to the right of this
An arsenal.
An arsenal, and then outside the window is San Francisco Bay. You have the ballpark where the Giants play. It's really a wonderful part. It's called Soma in San Francisco. It's where our producer behind the scenes here and me, we came up in Web 2.0 together. We would run around all of the streets, probably including many of the lofts that the studio's in now, helping to launch all these startups. So what a wonderful way to kick things off. You're back in business. You've got people in your studio. You're kicking off a 48-hour music video marathon. This is fantastic. You're sitting in front of a grand piano. At some point, we're going to have to ask you to play. But our first guest, before we get into things here, John and I are taking things a little bit more casually today. Our first guest is MIA. And I think that's an intersections first. So we're going to roll with it. First, we're going to make lemonade out of lemons, and that may or may not include vodka. Here in Lake Tahoe, we have a lakeshore lemonade, as we call it, and that is the most popular drink here on the beach. Now, with that said, let's officially welcome everybody so that we could just jump right into conversation. We'll see if our first guest shows up. If not, then John... you can be my first guest, and I'll be yours.
And vice versa. The other thing to point out, Brian, is that we have Elizabeth Weil coming in as guest number 2 at the top of the hour. And you won't want to miss this conversation, because if there's anything that, remains to be done in venture capital, it's hard to say that we have a more accomplished person to report on how venture capital is doing, what hot trends are, and maybe some of the deals that she's been involved with. Elizabeth Weil from Scribble Ventures. So stay tuned for that.
Yes, she came highly recommended. In fact, her latest investment that just went public is a success story in of itself. And so with that, we'll jump right in. Welcome to Intersections, a weekly conversational jam session that dives deep into the intersections among technology, innovation, culture, ideas. I guess, pianos, artistry. We bring diverse personalities and worldviews together in the service of greater understanding and unlearning. This is a community, and Together, we learn and unlearn moving forward, and we help create the future that we want to see, that we want to be part of. I'd like to introduce my co-founder and co-host, John Kao. The Economist is called Mr. Kao, Mr. Creativity, and a serial innovator. He's a thought leader, entrepreneur, and advisor. That just sort of sets the stage, really. I mean, this is someone who is sought after by world leaders in business and government. He is Tony-nominated producer of film and stage. He wrote the best-selling book, Jamming: The Art and Discipline of Business Creativity. He's been a professor at Harvard Business School. He served as visiting faculty at MIT Media Lab at Stanford. I mean, the credentials are incredible, and he's still rocking and rolling out there. He's still guiding companies. He's still guiding world leaders. He's still speaking on the circuit. He's writing a column at Forbes, among many other places. John, welcome to Intersections.
Hey, Brian, thanks for that generous intro. And let me reciprocate in kind. When Brian and I first started talking about doing the show way back, almost a year ago now, hard to believe, we're on pandemic time, so everything kind of flows in unpredictable, nonlinear ways. I couldn't have been more excited because Brian is a towering figure in matters digital and in matters innovation. So in a way, he's kind of like my innovation twin with his own point of view, his own network, his own, I think, mission to bring innovation to life in this very turbulent time. Brian is someone who has made important linkages between digital and social media, digital and marketing, digital and organizational transformation, digital and innovation before digital was even a thing, as we might call it, and has tirelessly shared his knowledge on stage and in books and in podcasts and in videos. And in addition to all of that, has a day job, which is global evangelist for innovation at Salesforce. So here we are. Innovation.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Thank you, my twin. And to all of those who are tuning in live, thank you. You make Intersections what it is. As I said earlier, this is a community. We're all learning together, unlearning together. Our fantastic guests help us to see things differently as this new future unfolds without a playbook, which I love. We're not necessarily going back to the old normal. Normal is part of the problem to begin with, and I love that. And so we need each other. We need to inspire one another to see new possibilities that we couldn't see otherwise. And with that said, because our first guest is MIA, John and I are going to be speaking to one another. But before we do, please let us know where you're tuning in from. Share your observations, share your comments, share your questions with us, and do stay tuned at the top of the hour for our next guest so that as we explore the state and future of venture capital, startup, innovation, entrepreneurialism, and all good things that help us guide our investments, our work, and also keeping aligned with all of the trends that are out there. So, John, what is top of mind these days? I mean, certainly there's no shortage of things to talk about.
Well, I could say that it's piano lessons with my teacher, Dan Tepfer, who, if you haven't heard of him, you should. And it's T-E-P as in Peter, F as in Frank, E-R. But I will also talk a little bit about a current musical opportunity that I have. I wrote a book called Jamming about 25 years ago. It's actually exactly 25 years ago. So this is the 25th anniversary. And it was kind of like my exit plan from Harvard Business School and from academic life. I wanted to write a book that was about innovation, but really couched in the vernacular of jazz, because I believed then, as I believe now, that jazz musicians know a lot more about innovation and leadership than they let on, and that we all, in a sense, have a lot to learn from jazz. So that was what Jamming was about. And now I just actually on social media asked my community what they thought of the idea of my updating Jamming 2.0, if you will, and reflecting on some of the current events in AI and data science and globalization of innovation and the wicked problems that we're facing and so much more that really, in a sense, take that notion of we have to make it up as we go along in the best sense of that term, turning that into a proficiency. So I'm thinking about doing that. And if anyone has any thoughts about that, I would welcome them. And then, you know, I'm in the pre-startup woodshed, working on a new venture with some very interesting people that's about stitching together the supply and the demand side of talent in an AI-activated market space. Something that I think is sorely needed, and also a curation platform to access the ocean of learning assets and professional development assets. So, you know, aside from that, not much is going on, I would say.
Aside from that, well, and also the fact that there's just so much happening in the world of innovation, and even going to the startup that you're working on. Hey, Carol, Redwood City, my former stomping grounds. In fact, the last time I saw John, I was driving from Redwood City to his place there in San Francisco. You know, one of the things that I'm doing later this afternoon, well, it's actually two very cool things in one event, which is rosé wine tasting with a well-known sommelier, and then we go into a conversation which is about the future of work from the employee's perspective, which is looking at how, in an era of AI and automation, how we need to reskill around creativity, around wellness, around the things that have sort of not necessarily been a priority in the organization. And when we offered food, or if we offered yoga classes, or if we offered other benefits, it was really to reduce people taking time off. Whereas the opposite is now true in an employee-centered market, focusing not only on their health and wellness, but also their growth, their well-being, and even taking time off, and maybe even working less, are actually the things that might drive productivity upward. At least all indicators are pointing that way, and it's certainly an interesting conversation that we're having in every industry right now. John, as you and I've discussed in the past, where we've looked at, for example, the hospitality industry or the restaurant industry,
Sure.
food and beverage. This is here in Tahoe, for example, we're having restaurants close temporarily because there are no employees to staff for demand. And that, that in of itself raises debates. For example, if we stop handing out checks to people, maybe they'll want to get back to work. But I think, a bigger theme here to explore is, whether or not we valued employees the way we probably should have over the years. And that maybe because economic models work pre-COVID, when we talk about a new normal or a next normal, we're not necessarily saying, let's get back to the way things were. This is really an opportunity to explore, for example, how we attract and retain great employees, great talent. And if it's one thing that we're learning today is that, if people aren't unhappy, then they certainly have the power to exercise their choices. And we're seeing this, as the NPR called it, the Great Resignation. And I'd love to hear, John, what your thoughts are on this subject.
Well, I think the focus of companies was to keep employees and keep them working in a way that suited the employer, not necessarily cultivating a broader array of proficiencies and capabilities. And so, as you say, I mean, the old industrial model of wellness was, let's make sure that we have workplace safety, and people don't cut off their fingers or get depressed, because that would detract from their efficiency at work. And I think now, I mean, it almost isn't a model of wellness. It's really a model of mass efficiency. But now, I think with the advent of AI and all that AI will replace over the coming decades, in terms of, let's say, lower value added tasks that machines will be able to do better than humans, it places a premium on the kind of human touch skills. So really, even if you look at wellness, a focus on wellness is about the well-being of an individual, which is something that you can't program in silicon. I mean, that's a biological phenomenon. It's stress reduction, it's happiness, it's a whole bunch of concepts that come from the positive education movement in terms of grit and resilience and adaptability and creativity and imagination and so forth and so on. And companies traditionally, and this is really a broad stroke comment, haven't really felt the need to invest in those kind of human proficiencies as much as in, well, you pass the test, you're in the company, your output is nominal or it's above nominal, so we'll give you a bonus, and measuring people like components in an industrial system. Now we have to start taking care of people in a very different way. So those are a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, and that's actually a wonderful human way to put it, is taking care of people in a way that's more relevant for these times. And money isn't everything. Absolutely not. In fact, one thing that we've learned in customer experience, for example, in our research, we found that in the last year alone, depending on where you are in the world, between 70 and 90% of people have tried a new brand, decided to exercise their power of choice. And they were driven to because they, for a lot of reasons, when you're forced to work from home or live from home or shop from home or be entertained by home, you start to learn different skills. And you start to learn about different needs. You start to question the meaning of life, if you will. And the thing that I want to emphasize that sets the next stage for disruption in both customer experience and employee experience is the fact that 80-something% of them are going to stick with these new choices and to continue to exercise these new behaviors post-pandemic. So that basically says that loyalty is up for grabs. In fact, loyalty itself as a word, it needs to be redefined, that that value is in the eye and the heart of the beholder. And we have to rethink value for the customer and value for the employee, and walking into this new future with the same mindsets as before, like, well, people aren't going to come to work, then they're not going to get a job. Another question is to what would attract the right people to join us so that we can thrive as an organization, but also as a community. And I think that there's a lot here that we can think. Every industry, hospitality, food and beverage, you name it, is healthcare, going to be
education,
healthcare. Yes, please, education. It should all. I mean, I'm going to just go on a side tangent here, but it's related to what you just said. For example, around education. So right now, the debate is whether or not our children should wear masks in the classroom, especially with the Delta variant and the next variant after that. When in fact, the debate could be, how could we take lessons from this hybrid world that we have to improve the caliber of our students' education so that they could be ready for the jobs of the future? Because what we're teaching them today is certainly not setting them up for success. In fact, I'll share with you the World Economic Forum's list of top 10 skills needed for jobs in 2025. Analytical thinking and innovation, active learning and learning strategies, complex problem solving, critical thinking and analysis, creativity, originality and initiative, leadership and social influence, technology use, of course, technology design and programming, resilience, as you mentioned earlier, stress tolerance and flexibility, and lastly, reasoning, problem solving, and ideation. I don't remember taking those classes in school per se, unless it was intentional. For example, when I was in research, there was a lot of data-driven courses I had to take, of course, critical thinking, but that's not something that our children are learning every single day. And these are the things that they're going to need to learn. So with that said, John, what advice do you have for those to influence new thinking from education to healthcare to work, so that it isn't a debate about trying to get things back to the way they were, but maybe using this as a Control-Alt-Delete moment to get things to where they need to be?
Well, that first of all plays into the distinction that I like to make between disruption and discontinuity. I mean, disruption implies somehow that we're going to fix things and get back to normal, and discontinuity implies that we have to invent a new roadmap for a new set of circumstances. And the statistics around the churn in jobs, the churn in employment, the employees not going back to old jobs, employees changing jobs, employees becoming not employees anymore as they kind of think about becoming an army of one or an entrepreneur or simply taking time off. Those statistics are stunning. And they represent a fundamental, it's like the Etch-a-Sketch board got shaken up and now it's all blank and ready for something new. So I think that we're all pretty cynical and used to people saying the right things but not doing them. And I think a fundamental proficiency on the part of leaders and also of organizations is their ability to engender trust. I mean, this is a kind of another, let's call it human proficiency that, you know, you're not going to have an AI expert at you know, kind of engendering trust for quite some time. A lot of other things have to happen first. But, you know, if you'll work with somebody if you trust them. I mean, this is the whole phenomenon of foxhole behavior during wars, where, you know, people don't fight for their national flag as much as they fight for the person next to them in the foxhole, you know, because there's a high level of trust. So there's two ways of looking at this. One is, what are organizations like that are able to create that sense of trust and that confidence that trust is justified? And then what are the opportunities in the, let's call it the extra enterprise space, the external space, for entrepreneurs who are creating every imaginable kind of platform and every imaginable kind of community supporting mechanisms, primarily in the digital domain, to have the secret sauce of those platforms be the ability to engender trust, because there's a real authenticity to the kind of community dynamics that are being created. So that would be one thought.
And I think the encouragement here too is that there, you know, oftentimes transformation or change is counterintuitive in that, you know, we believe that the tried and true formula for success is what we've always known, right? In fact, I often say that sometimes success can be a poor teacher when it comes to innovation, because you bring to a decision life's experiences, life's successes, and also life's hardships and failures. But when you decide to experiment in new ways, which is why I believe, why I'm a champion for active experimentation, is that you start to learn what works. And in a world where people are actually expressing to you, both in actions and also in their words and sentiments and aspirations, what it is that they value, and you start to experiment with those insights, then you can not only learn, you could actually learn what works. And we're seeing, when you put employee experience, or if you put student experience, or you put teacher experience front and center, great things happen. Yet there's this incredible reluctance to change. And you know, I think if we're gonna strive to work to normal, we're gonna have missed the lesson in all of this in the last 14, 15 months. And the fact that we're still in many ways debating in some cases whether or not this virus is a hoax or whether it's real, I think that we're just going to have to make the impact where we can at a one-to-one level. One of the reasons I love doing this show with you, John, is that both you and I, we learn from the great guests that we have every week, but also together we can help inspire change. I mean, your job is to inspire change, lead change. My job is to inspire and lead change, and we can't do it as individuals. We have to do it as a community, and that's really where that scale and the relationships come in with that scale. I'd love to hear, John, your thoughts about, in your work, what are the top challenges to get people to see something differently, even those who are like stuck in their place, whether it's about education or governments or business transformation? What is it that you constantly face, and how do you help get them to the other side?
Well, I think it's a question of how you tell the story. You know, I think that there's a way to make existential threats and burning platforms boring and you know, kind of business as usual, and that is the typical, you know, portfolio of white papers and you know, business case analyses and things of this kind. So story is about evoking emotion, because there is no change without emotion and a desire to change, and the fear and anxiety and this feeling of dislocation that comes from a realization that change is necessary. So denial and confirmation bias and legacy thinking is a constant problem in every imaginable organization. It's a problem in psychotherapy, it's a problem in consulting, it's a problem everywhere. So how do you overcome that? Well, it's about how you tell the story. So I'll give you two of my favorite examples. After the First World War, the U.S. Navy was convinced that the future belonged to big battleships, and this was the so-called dreadnought theory. And there was a guy named Billy Mitchell from the fledgling Army Air Corps who said, no, the future is in aviation, and no battleship can stand up to a bomber. And the admiral said, "Oh, you must be joking. These bombers are like toys." So Billy Mitchell arranged a demonstration where they towed out a junked battleship, and Billy Mitchell flew some bombers over it and sank it in like 15 minutes. Well, you can't deny that anymore because it's evidence, and you've experienced something that no amount of intellectualizing or rationalization can prevent. I mean, there are all these famous stories of war games in the military where if you don't get the outcome you want, you simply manipulate the variables to make sure that the outcome you want is the outcome you want, which is a guarantee that you're not going to be unprepared for real life when it breaks in on you. The other favorite example comes from work I did with Philips way back in the 1980s, where I got to work a little bit with Jan Timmer, who had just signed on as the CEO. And what he did at his first management meeting was he just put one item on the agenda, and that was a facsimile of a financial newspaper, it might have been the Financial Times, where the top right-hand story, all fully written out, was Philips goes bankrupt. And then there was a big story behind that. And that was the only item on the agenda, because what he wanted to do was to use a little bit of theater to kind of shock his team out of the, oh yeah, so we see these numbers and charts and graphs and so forth and so on, which is kind of keeping the narrative at a very narrow, emotionless, traditional level that prevents the arousing of emotion that in turn creates change.
What a beautiful way to tell that story, too, because narrative and storytelling are more powerful than we can imagine, because it helps bring people together. If done right, it helps bring people together in a way where their own biases are actually set aside subconsciously, so that people can come together and watch, listen, and learn. And the narrative of storytelling internally is as important as it is externally. I'm doing some work with a very large CPG brand, and one of the exercises that we had to use to help people come to the table with bypassing skepticism or negativity or the detractors, etc., was to go through an exercise of what might lead that brand to die. And it was a tombstone exercise, as it's called, and you write essentially the inscription on the tombstone of what happened and why they couldn't prevent it. And the next series of that exercise is to then go through to say, well, what are the things that we could have done differently, and what are the things that I could have done differently? And I think that one is the most important. I think that one's the most important exercise right now, because I think I have the saying that if you're waiting for someone to tell you what to do, you're on the wrong side of innovation, in that there is no playbook for the way that the future should unfold. In fact, in many ways, it's not what it was used to be. We're on a new trajectory, and we need that creativity, that individuality, and that hope and aspiration of individuals to go out and carry forward what these new possibilities can be. And the role of that is really you. Right? You, me, us as individuals. I call this a prelude to innovation, that individuality, that transformation that has to happen before that aha moment to realize that you do, or you can play, and you must play a part in this. And with that said, John, I just realized that our second guest is not here. So that means that there's officially something wrong with our StreamYard links for our guest. So I guess we could continue this conversation, because we might have to reschedule our guests.
Well, I think that we've always talked about, the plan B if somebody didn't show up, and that we would talk with each other. We never really get a chance to talk about what's on our minds beyond a passing comment, nor do I think our our audience really have a sense of what we're working on these days and what's hot for us. So I actually think that's time well spent. Although, we'll have to find somebody to spank.
Yeah, I just sent an email to our team to share whatever link it's that we have here. Perhaps they were trying to patch into the wrong green room, but also it could be a thing that there was a glitch before we came in where a lot of the accounts had to be updated.
Here's Elizabeth.
Here's Elizabeth. Wow. All right. Well, on that, John, I guess what we're going to have to do, and let's get together here, and then maybe tomorrow or in the next week, and let's plan our new format where we do set some time for us as well as our guests. And then also our innovation segment that we're going to introduce. But now that Elizabeth's here, we'll shift gears and we'll jump in. So, John, do you want to do the honors of introducing?
Oh, I'm happy to do it. So, Elizabeth Weil is currently founder and managing director of Scribble Ventures, which, by her own description, is a network-driven seed stage investment firm. I'm going to be curious to know what the network-drivenness of it is, although I can suspect. She's been doing venture investing and instigating of new entrepreneurial projects since it was a thing, probably, and has been associated with some of the leading lights in the venture field, among others, Andreessen Horowitz, and served as an executive at Twitter in its heyday, although I assume it still considers itself to be in its heyday. So there's the operating experience side of the equation. And, if you look at her track record, I'm sure her, venture results must be in, the top decile, if not quartile, has invested in more than 100 companies, including Coinbase, which I guess we need to offer some congratulations, because there's certainly been a kind of a bump there. So, Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And I disregard my goggle marks. I do confess I just got out of the pool, and you're seeing those. So my life is real as I am. So yes, you're getting it all.
Well, goggles, are a sign of wellness, which we, or attention to wellness, which we talked about just a moment ago, as one of the portfolios of human or soft skills that, now really important, because AIs aren't going to offer us the same kind of caring that humans are. So we heartily approve. So maybe we could start with just a little bit of background on where Scribble Ventures fits in the current galaxy of investment modalities, and what you mean by network driven, and then we can jump a little bit more deeply into some of the stuff you've been doing.
Sure. And a bit about the history and how it actually came to be, because that is very much part of the story.
Why the name is Scribble as opposed to, Weil Ventures or something like that?
Oh, that's a good question too. I've got all of these. But before we even switch modes onto the make time for doing something athletic every day, at least for me, it's athletic. I've always preached that everybody, no matter what the age, what the role, you need some non-negotiable in your life. And for me, my morning run or my morning swim has been my non-negotiable. And there were too many early times in my career where I felt like I was I need to earn it, and I need to be in the office before anyone else, and I need to be working so hard, and I wasn't making that 1 hour time for me. And no matter what it is for you, I think it's so important to set that aside, especially through the pace that we've all been seeing that we're working at, and such a rapid clip, especially given all of the situations that have been thrown at us over the last 18 months. So a little bit about where Scribble came to be. So after my time at Stanford University, I joke I was at 2 venture-backed startups throughout school, which was a great eye-opening operating experience in the early days when you don't have much to lose. And my first, I say, real people job after Stanford was at Menlo Ventures, a stage agnostic firm on Sand Hill. Learned the ropes there. After that, went to Institutional Venture Partners, a late stage venture firm, and learned a lot more there about how to assess a company in its later stages, deep diving into the analytics at that point, because you do have some and metrics to show. And then was fortunate to make the early investment in Twitter there, and got to know that team really well. And my husband and I were already married at the time, and he was ready to go do something new. So I elbowed him and said, Twitter needs somebody to start their analytics team. And he was an engineer. So went over and started the analytics team when Twitter was about 30 people. And I got to know the team that summer while I still worked at what I thought was my fancy job on Sand Hill Road with far too nice of an office for a 20-something-year-old. And pretty soon I just realized I was sneaking my laptop to the Twitter office so much more. And I was going for the company all hands every week. And I just was seeing the drive and the fun and the energy that you can't find at any other place than a fast growing hyper growth startup that's just off to the races and really doing a lot in the world. And took a role working for Dick Costello, or CEO. So I started the corp dev team that turned into anything under the sun at the time when it was non-eng. I was about the 50th employees, and it was corp dev, biz ops, product marketing, onboarding, company culture, making the soccer team t-shirts, everything. And I just had a blast there over 4 years through hyper growth to about 2,500 people. Now, fast forward. So then at Andreessen Horowitz for 4 years, leading a team called Market Development. So an entirely different side of venture capital, the operations world, which was really eye-opening too. And that motion at Andreessen Horowitz is essentially connecting the Fortune 500, Global 2000 to the portfolio companies, with the end goal being business development relationships and ultimately revenue for our portfolio companies. So a really impactful, fun role in motion. Missed the investing side though. So that was a bit of the catalyst for Kevin and I, husband, we were both operating, having our full-time jobs, but we'd gotten to know great people in our network over, almost 20 years in the Valley now, but engineers that we'd worked with at Twitter, great people at other operating companies, ideas that we just thought, wow, that's a big idea. We want to back those people and we believe in them. And it really started out small. So over about the 8 years before Scribble came to be, we'd invested in more than 100 companies. And finally, I picked my head up after I took one more managing director job at a firm called 137 Ventures, where I was for 4 years. And that was late stage structured secondaries. So really interesting part of the asset class, but not scratching that early stage itch that I love tackling with our personal portfolio. And I picked my head up and I said, what do I love doing? What am I armed well to do? We had a ballooning portfolio of 100 great companies that had turned many of them into great successes around people that we trusted, really small amounts of capital. And with the institutional investor training in me, I looked at that model and I said, look, we are being told we're the most helpful person on the cap table, yet the smallest check on that cap table. That's a little bit backwards. And we were on the sidelines of our companies, knowing who was performing, who wasn't as much, who we should be doubling down on. So this model really crystallized for me of, we've had this great early traction, early access. How do I parlay that into an institutional fund where we're still collaboratively driven investments, very network driven, like you mentioned, and that we're able to reserve enough capital to really double down on those winners, since we're still consistently told we're often one of the smaller checks on the cap table, yet the most helpful around that table. So something I like to, much more my personality, to put chips into other people's baskets before I ask for anything else. So that was a bit of the quick story.
And what about the name of the fund? Scribble.
Yes. So of course, I run a letterpress stationery and design business. I started about 13 years ago, self-taught designer. a big part of my life. I always have loved the company culture, so much of the branding part, so many early stage companies. One of my first questions for them is, where'd that name come from? So it's really important to me. So of course, I picked my head up at the very start of COVID, and I had this impetus for like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to. I hated selling Girl Scout cookies, so I did not want to raise venture capital money. I was terrified of asking anybody for $1. And so it was during this time, and of course, I was calling it some other really stodgy thing where I think it had capital attached to it, and it sounded like, a big private equity firm, and that wasn't me. And of course, a real story for me was like, I need a great name that I can get behind and that I can shout from the rooftops. And literally less than 1 month into COVID, while I was racking my brain around this, I'd actually hired a great naming firm to help me. That was not a success. And in the middle of the night in April last year, I woke up and I wrote scribble next to my bedside and went back to sleep. And I woke up in the morning and I started Google domaining any of those iterations, realized Scribble Ventures didn't exist. There was no other brand or franchise out there doing that. And the tagline wrote itself for me. All of these great entrepreneurs, these brilliant ideas are starting with a scribble. That's how all of our doodles start and all of these great things that we do. And you can't get around that at the seed stage. And it just was really iconic for me, and something I'm such a drawer. I have a 6-year-old and 4-year-old twins, so crayons and scribbles are not only great works of art in my house, but very much on the walls as well. So I have a lot of inspiration every day for what we do.
That's fantastic. Well, it's great to hear the story. In a way, you're representative of the classic model of Silicon Valley investing. I mean, I got to know people like Pitch Johnson and some of his cohorts, and they, invested in people, and they were very early to the party, and
70s, 60s, some of those kids,
and cared about their ventures. They weren't in the portfolio, the strict portfolio management business of, deploying a certain amount of capital in a certain time frame. They were much more concerned about creation of value. So my hat's off to you, because I think these days it's tempting to, with the abundance of capital, or at least the way it's been up until now, to, raise a fund and call yourself a venture capitalist and, kind of write a bunch of checks, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a explosion of innovation. I'm going to throw over to Brian in just a second, but the last question for you is, what are your observations about the current scene? You've got mega funds, you've got super mega funds, the SoftBanks of the world, you've got SPACs, you've got PE companies, you've got corporate venture teams. It seems like, and having been a serial entrepreneur myself and being sensitive to the investment climate, it seems like a food fight out there, with it being, in a sense, there's
no lack of capital.
Yeah, a market that favors entrepreneurs right now. I mean, what's your sense of, how would you describe what's going on relative to, let's say, what was going on when you started off?
Yeah, good question. And I've now seen this over about 2 decades playing out in the venture space. So it's been interesting to look at. So for Scribble Ventures, we're a pre-seed, seed, and opportunistic A fund, $50 million fund, very purposefully built that way so we could remain the check size that we did want to be at. That said, yes, everything's changing. Honestly, for far too many years, I talked myself out of starting my very own firm because there's no lack of capital. There's all these other great people out there. I grew up in a tiny town outside of Sacramento. My mom was a single mom, 2nd grade teacher, never made more than $40,000 a year. I looked at it as, of course, it's easier to go to a place that, they take care of all the management there, and your paycheck arrives every 2 weeks, and there's a copy machine in the lobby, and, all of the
Right.
niceties of business, despite knowing that I'm very much a self-starter and have been since I was 6 years old. So right now with the market, I think there is definitely not a lack of capital, but there are so many unique models that are able to fit into this ecosystem. And I think the thing that I've really learned over the 20 years of this, people that I met in my first rodeo at Menlo Ventures, when I was so green, so fresh, those entrepreneurs, those great people in the valley, they have other cycles. They come back and do other great things. And that the relationship piece is so key of this industry. And that is, unparalleled anywhere else. So I think there is a place for all of these firms. The SoftBanks of the world, which you alluded to, they have an extremely different model. It's one of the reasons I've liked Scribble to remain this collaborative model. Other, quote unquote, competitive firms to us are actually calling us and wanting us to be a part of rounds because they know what our superpowers they are. They know that we're really helpful. We write a check that can be scaled to add other great entrepreneurs around the table or people with great background in addition to another institutional firm. So for me, that collaborative model fits well into this ballooning ecosystem.
Right. Great to talk with you. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Last thought is I've had the opportunity and really fortunately to try on a lot of different hats across the asset class. And even you mentioned corporate venture capital. For my about a year after leaving 137 Ventures, I decided to take the role running Lego Ventures for the Americas. And when I got that call and I thought, Legos, I mean, that's the way to my heart. I am an avid Lego builder. In fact, I just finished a 4,000 piece set last night of the amazing treehouse. So it's been also my COVID hack for having a side brain project on the other desk besides my laptop. But I thought I would be less intrigued by corporate venture capital because of all of the political waves and the things you're not in control of your own destiny necessarily, and all incentives aren't necessarily supposed to align given those models. And I learned there's such a need of venture capital and great companies like that to play a role in this. But until we solve that in a way that really can remove a lot of the overhead that it takes, until you can be a nimble, really nimble corporate venture firm. I knew that wasn't for me either. So I've had the opportunity to try on a lot of hats and really feel what's my sweet spot.
Well, which is also being a systems integrator as well, because now you can talk to people on all sides of the table and make the connection. Which is where I guess the network-drivenness of your model comes from.
Yes, and a lot of founders ask, like, what are your superpowers and what do you help with? And usually VCs have some specialty. And because I've played so many different roles and I can be that integrator in sorts, I help so much on the great people in my network. So that plays to the fundraising or the recruiting theme.
Right.
Great experience at other venture firms and knowing that landscape. That part of my network plays into the fundraising, next round of funding. Who are those people? Who are those firms? What sets you up for success? Also with the Andreessen side of playing that big customer role, the people in the Fortune 500, Global 2000 that I've had the chance to meet, those are awesome spots to start when you need these great connections in biz dev capacities or partnerships, for example. And then probably one of my favorite roles to play for a lot of our portfolio companies is, I very much wear my heart on my sleeve. And, I always joke that there's too much going on and we're all too busy. Like, you have to have one story. Like, you can't be a lot of different people or it's going to get way too confusing. So I'm just very much me. Most of my founders go on walks on my trails at home with me, and that's our hour meeting. I don't drink coffee. I drink Diet Mountain Dew, which is that's a podcast in itself. But I'm very much bringing my life into the work we do so often just being that founder coach, despite being, fiduciarily connected to the company, is something I also do. And then with Kevin being our operator in residence, he touches the product side. My partner on a lease touches so many other amazing parts of the business and able to help. So we've really been able to congregate this group of superpowers that all somehow comes back to the network and just being good people in it.
So my kind of collaborative superpower holder is Brian, who's been waiting to jump in with a question or two, patiently, I might add. Elizabeth, it's great to meet you.
I talk too much?
No, hardly. It's just we always have this implicit negotiation around how we're going to split up the time with our guests. And here we go with Brian.
Great.
Well, Elizabeth, what a pleasure to have you on, and what a storied investment portfolio and career. I mean, just if you have a chance, everyone watching this, take a look at some of the companies that she's helped bring to life, and it is an incredible list of names. So with the few minutes we have left, Elizabeth, what are some of the trends that we should be paying attention to now? So let's take a step back and look at, this is a new world. You have some people in this world trying to go back to normal. You have some people trying to create this next normal. And certainly there are a lot of trends vying for what's going to be the next big thing. And I'd love to hear from you with your superpowers. What are the things that we need to really be paying attention to?
And I can't share all of my secrets or my investment theses until you come and join the Scribble team. But there's some large themes that I've always gotten behind, and those are more out of interest and need. So fortunately, the waves in the market are lining up with a lot of those too. Because of my time at Twitter and trying to scale a company that was hyper growth, you can't get around. You need more system. You need ways to manage employees and people and just training them and hiring, everything. I've been a big supporter in now what is called future of work. But for a lot of those 8 years, a lot of the companies that we invested in, I always joked that the enterprise needed to be able to be used by real people. And historically, enterprise tools and building these great companies have been built by, people that it's just a little too stodgy. And we're in a different world now. And with the ability for people to not only work remotely anywhere, I think we all know that companies are not going back to the way they were no matter what. And workforces are distributed. Some of the teams that I really get behind and have supported have been entirely remote throughout their entire life, over a decade now, not just COVID preempted. So I think some of these ways we're changing the ways of work, of the ways of living. I look at global cities change, global workforces change, the tools that we're going to need to be able to run that new nimble lifestyle. A lot of these things are what we think about. I even think about workforce planning, and square feet per head is not going to be the same that it has been historically. And some of those little nuances that seem so small, but when you think of every enterprise on the planet now having to change their global footprint, that's a huge, huge opportunity as well. So just some of these edge cases, but really humanizing the way we've all done work, we've all lived, and these tools that we need to use every day. And even deep back end tools, they're being used by quote unquote real people. And even if it's a great trained engineer, we need to be able to understand and do more in a nimble way, in my opinion.
It's incredible how over the years the human being in all of this has taken a back seat in every facet, and now it's sort of this is a lovely bookend of the conversation that John and I started here at the beginning of the show, which was the humanization of the future of work. and how things like employee wellness and well-being become more important than ever beyond just productivity. And if I may just ask you one last question before we run out of time, what I spend a great deal of my time working with leaders and change agents and stodgy organizations, trying to inspire them to make the change that is going to prevent the inevitable demise of their relevance. It's put it nicely, and it's not easy. You have a CEO of a global financial organization who drew a line in the sand that said everybody has to come back into the office by this date or they won't have a job. We still have these mindsets in this new world. What's your advice to anyone willing to listen in this new novel economy? How can they change to be relevant and to set the stage for future success?
Yeah, great question. 2 words would be remain nimble. And right now, things are still changing. And something that I've tried to work out of my own personality, I will give a head nod to my mother, is rigidity. And some of these older companies, they have worked so well because of this, what they think is the rigidity that they've been managed on to date. That's changing. And from my catbird seat at Andreessen, these Fortune 500s were begging us, how do we train a nimble workforce? How do we hire people that want to work at a blue chip company? How do we give them health opportunities, great ways to still grow, not be at a early stage, fast growing company? And right now we need to remain non-rigid and really nimble and be open to changing, iterating. Large companies, how do startups succeed? We iterate, we change, we morph. Do that right now more than ever, because we have had a global pandemic allow us and enable us to shake up this world and do it differently, do it better, have time for life, work on your circadian rhythm, all of these things that are so much more human. And it is time. So be open to it as we put back together the new world and the new future of the enterprise.
Wonderful and so inspired. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll have to invite you back, dive deeper into the future of work.
I'm at Elizabeth, so you know where to track me down.
Looking forward to it. Elizabeth, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Amazing. She is just a force. Fantastic. Well, John, how do you feel?
I feel good. I'm not James Brown, but I do feel good.
Oh, wonderful. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning into this week's Intersections. I think John and I are going to be inspired too to make some time for our conversations to see what's important to us each week so that we can help you in between all of these conversations, and we can also be helped by what's important to you. Please do stay connected. Subscribe to our Substack, our newsletter. Everything is at intersectionslive.com. We thank you once again for joining us. We thank our special guest, Elizabeth, for joining us today. And John, always a pleasure to see you. And I like the stoic pose that you have there, and love the new setup for this week. See you later, everybody.
See you next week.